Tonight is the last portion of Shabbat that we started. Some of you were here from the beginning 44 weeks ago, approximately. Maybe a little bit more because there were some weeks that we were not here. We started the Sodot HaBayit HaYehudi, the fundamentals of the Jewish home. We began with Kashrut, the various halachot and customs, quite a bit of information on how to manage, how to maintain a kosher home. We went on to Taharat HaMishpacha, family purity laws that concern married couples. And now we're with Shabbat. Shabbat, we covered the Lametet Melachot, the 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat. And there are a few additional items that are Asur, prohibited in the Rabbanan, that the rabbis gave us, decreed, for a variety of reasons, either because they resemble or because they take away from the spirit of Shabbat. So there's various shvutim, as we said last week, Zerot and Rabbanan, that are intended to preserve the sanctity and the holiness of Shabbat. Tonight is the last group of halachot that are, I guess you can call them midrabanan, but some of them are in Divrei HaNevi'im, the prophets have actually said, that apply to Shabbat. They're not midoraita, nevertheless we have accepted them. They are just like any other halacha. They're important, and they cover quite a few areas that some people are unaware of. The category that we'll be discussing first is called Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah means that which we have received by way of the prophets, that it is important in order to preserve the Shabbat that we have these ideas in mind as well. There is a famous pasuk that we read on Shabbat, V'chidbato me'asot derachecha u'mitzot chatzecha v'daber davar. One needs to honor the Shabbat, or honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by holding back from doing what we do during the week, by not speaking in the same way we speak during the week, and by not occupying ourselves with the same occupation that we occupy ourselves during the middle of the week. So we have here three categories. The first one, perhaps, is walking. We don't walk the same way on Shabbat the way we walk during the rest of the week. In the rest of the week you could be jogging, you could be running. That we do not do on Shabbat. One cannot run on Shabbat or do any form of exercise and jogging, because that is not respectful of Shabbat. It is something which belongs in the middle of the week and not on Shabbat, unless it's the sort of mitzvah. Unless it's running to the Bet HaKnesset if he wants to be there on time, then that's permissible. Otherwise, it lacks in the kavod of Shabbat if one does these things that he does during the week. So that is halicha. The halicha, the walking, is different on Shabbat. The same thing with our occupations, and what we do with our time, with our free time on Shabbat. Besides the prayer, besides the eating, we have free time. What we do during that time, what we think about, what we discuss, what we handle, what we read, all of that is under the category of me'asot derachecha u'mitzot chatzecha. And there's also something called the daber davar, meaning our speech, what we discuss, what we talk about. All of that is different than Shabbat. So we said that jogging and exercise would be asur on Shabbat, but if children enjoy themselves running around, playing, jumping around, that's okay, that's permissible for them. Another idea behind the mitzvot chatzecha, from occupying ourselves or engaging ourselves in those activities that we do during the week, an example of that would be, let's say you're building a home or an apartment building, new construction, which is not too far away from your house, and you want to go check on it, see, well, let me see, what am I going to need to buy? What do we need? So I can go Sunday and buy it. So you go check your house on Shabbat. That's asur. You don't go check the house to see what needs to be taken care of, what you need to purchase after Shabbat. Because that occupation, what you're doing right now, is asur to do on Shabbat. In other words, you wouldn't be able to purchase. You wouldn't be able to do these things on Shabbat. So even though you're just going to inspect, so you can do these things after Shabbat when it's permissible, that's still asur. So in other words, you can't go and check out what you need to do, something which cannot be done now, but that you will be able to do right after Shabbat. That's also under the mitzvot chatzecha. Inyanei chol, masah u'matan, are there other examples, anything that has to do with the week, your business matters, trying to figure out, analyzing, anything that has to do with your job or with your business, anything that has to do with activities of during the week, all of that is considered in the mitzvot chatzecha. In other words, on Shabbat, we set our mind away from that. We don't discuss it. We don't think about it. Even though thinking there's no yisur. You're not doing any yisur by a machshava alone, by having a thought. But one should preferably not even think about it, because that would take away from his menucha, from his rest, from the true spirit of Shabbat. But the isur, the prohibition, which comes under the Mitzvot Tzechah, is not to engage and to be occupied with those activities that we do during the middle of the week that do not belong on Shabbat, either because they cannot be done on Shabbat or because they have nothing to do with Shabbat. Right. It's like you're preparing to do work. So it's a form of activity that you would not be able to do. In other words, you would not be able to purchase, you would not be able to go to the store and get those items. So therefore, preparing for it is also a surah.
You only someone as a kid is something how the business. You have to ask him, or you reflect it, or you say it's not something delicate.
If it's a very short question, how are things going, right? Even though he's asking about the business, it's a specific detail, everything worked out okay. That's not a surah. You're not getting into a major conversation. But obviously, when somebody attempts to get into a conversation more in detail, you can tell them it's Shabbat. We don't discuss these matters on Shabbat. Another example, an interesting example would be, let's say somebody wants to catch the first bus out from downtown. So he walks there, and he waits at the bus station so he can catch the first bus out as soon as Shabbat is out. You can't do that. You can't go to the bus station or do something to speed up the process, in other words, so you could, right after Shabbat is over, you're going to be able to do it. So long as what you're doing now openly shows that that's what you intend to do. If you go to a friend's house that happens to be close to the bus station, you don't tell anybody what you're doing. You keep it to yourself. You just stay there and catch the first bus. That's permissible. But then you're not really openly discussing or doing something that shows that what you intend to do right after Shabbat. You keep it to yourself. So the machshava alone, the thought alone, is permissible, even though that's your thought, that's your intention. But if you actually go and show and demonstrate or talk about it, that would be a surah. Right.
So you have to follow before Shabbat. You start getting dressed, getting ready.
Right.
Things in order, their thoughts in order. As soon as Shabbat is over, you have to get cars.
Just a second.
No, but to say that sometimes in the airplane, you have to leave right after Shabbat. So half hour before Shabbat's over, getting dressed and prepared. Is that a before to do that? No, ready to close.
Yes, we'll talk about that soon. You wouldn't be able to do that on Shabbat. That's correct. That's for a different reason. That's called hakana. Right. Not the same as going and doing something which is a surah for you to do right now, right? In preparation of Motzei Shabbat. Slightly different. They're similar, but the other one is in some ways stricter. You can't do almost anything that we will soon see for after Shabbat. Right now we're talking about something which really would be a surah for you to do now. It would be a surah for me to get on a bus now. It would be a surah for me to buy these items, to take care of my needs. So my checking it out right now is also a surah. Because what I need to do is a surah on Shabbat, checking it out or preparing for that is also a surah. That's a different idea than what we're talking about, which is called plain hakana. Alright, the next item is the Torah mitzvah is mutar. For example, let's say you want to sell aliyot. The shul wants to sell. There's quite a bit of a discussion if this is permissible or not, because that's a form of business. We don't do business on Shabbat. So selling aliyot, for the highest bidder is permissible because it's letzorech mitzvah. It's a donation for the Beit HaKnesset, so it's customary. In most communities, it's an acceptable thing to do, even though it appears to be good. As long as you don't overdo it. As long as you don't say, what is it going to be, cash or credit card? Something like that. As long as you don't overdo it and get into a bigger discussion, which is business-like, simple selling an aliyah is letzorech mitzvah. You're making an appeal for Eretz Israel. Right? There's a war going on. Remember Yom Kippur. In all the shuls, even in the Hasidic shul, who are not Zionists, there was an appeal for money. To raise money for Eretz Israel. They need it. They were in great danger. That would be the sort of mitzvah that would be permissible to do on Shabbat. So these are examples of the mitzvot tzechah, or mitzvot deracheta. The ber davar, what about the prohibition of talking? It's prohibited to talk about your vacation planning, tochniot, all sorts of plans on Shabbat that have nothing to do with the Shabbat. Talking about where you want to go, vacation, talking about that, talking about your business. So here it's not a maaseh itself, it's not the doing something, it's not being occupied with an activity, it's just talking about it. That would be a surah as well. Talking about repairs that need to be made. Okay, I've got to fix this. After Shabbat, I'm going to call this guy, we've got to replace this, and we've got to do this. This has nothing to do with Shabbat. So this is V'daber Davar. Our dibur, our speech, our conduct, our walking, all of this is different on Shabbat.
Come back to word Israel. Finally, the rabbi always put Israel.
That's fine. That's permissible. That's acceptable. It's something in the past, something that, they want to know how you're doing. Something like the example before. It's not something too specific about future plans that have nothing to do with Shabbat. And first of all, Eretz Yisrael is different. It's not like, so where did you go in Hawaii? Did you see the dancing there? Did you see this? Did you go to the volcano? There's a big difference between Eretz Yisrael and other vacations, right? But even so, if somebody asks you, you have a good time, how was it? You can say it's okay. Tell them we had a good time. We had a good time. It was long. It's not business. It was long, but it's Baruch Hashem, it was good. It was refreshing. That's okay. Then have to start making plans. Okay, where are we going to go? What are we going to do the first day? How much food should we? What does that have to do with Shabbat? Right? The whole idea, what the rabbis, what the Nevi'im were trying to tell us is to preserve the Kedusha Shabbat, to preserve the special avirah, the special atmosphere that exists on Shabbat. And that is the reason why we don't do all these melachot, whether it's Midoratam or Rabbanan, so that we can experience, how special this day really is. Yeah. Right. Yes, it's the sort of mitzvah. It is the sort of mitzvah. No, that you don't have. It's better not to talk about because that's a plan. If you want to right, if you want to talk about the mitzvah, what you plan to do, what you want to do, that's okay. I want to do this. I want to do that. That's fine. That's a mitzvah. But the details, the nestiyah, the details. I'm going to pay so much for the ticket. I'm going to go with this airline. That has nothing to do with Shabbat. That's the lo shayach. Right. All right. There are quite a few subcategories from this divrei Kabbalah. Subcategories that are similar to these activities that are asur for similar reasons. One of them is called tirha yetera. Something may be permissible on Shabbat because it's not a melacha. It's not one of the lameted, not one of the 39 categories of work. But because doing this would involve a tremendous amount of tirha, tirha means bother, so because of tirha yetera, the rabbi said you can't do it. What would be an example of tirha yetera? Okay, this is a long Shabbat afternoon. Great time to clean my garage. What do you say? Tirha yetera, he's not doing any melacha b'chlalo. He's not going to turn on the lights. He's not going to cut. He's not going to tear. He's not going to break. He's not going to fix. He's not going to do any melacha. He's simply going to be cleaning his garage. And I think that's on a lot of people's minds. I think a lot of people have that as one of their plans, to eventually clean their garage. I hear that from a lot of people. Yeah. So Shabbat should not be the day. Choose Sunday or another day, but not Shabbat. That's called tirha yetera. Too much bother. You're going to do that, even though there's no melacha being transgressed. The Shabbat is going to disappear. How are you going to feel the Shabbat? People ask, why can't I go to the beach on Shabbat? Why can't I have a good time? Why do I have to be locked up and closed up? They don't understand that in order to experience the Shabbat, you got to do things properly. If you go to the beach, you do all these things, which may not be a melacha. Somehow, if you're able to walk there, you're not going to experience the Shabbat. You're going to be doing something that does not belong to Shabbat. Rosh Baruch made this seventh day a unique day. This is the only day of the week that is not cursed. And 6 days, we have to work, we have to toil. There's a curse. We have to earn a living. Shabbat menucha. We're able to experience 1 day a week a little bit of the time of Gan Eden, what it will be like in paradise. I wish every day was Shabbat. All right, so tirha yetera is also prohibited. An example was the cleaning of the garage, or you want to reorganize your living room. There's heavy furniture. Okay, let's put the piano here. Let's move the sofas here. And it's not because you're going to have a chug bayit. It's not because you're going to have guests come over that you need to move around the furniture. Or you're going to have a shiur class in the living room. No, that would be permissible to move things around. Even if it's a heavy table. There's no use to moving the heavy table across the room. As long as it's a Torah mitzvah, or a Torah Shabbat. You need it because you have more guests coming. You need to add another table, that's fine. But to rearrange the furniture, heavy furniture that is difficult to move, not on Shabbat. That's called tirha yetera. Under this category of tirha yetera is also included the prohibition that many people are unaware of. La'achil siforim v'chayot shenan mutalot alecha. If you do not own birds, the birds out there, or the animal, the cat or the dog out there, it is prohibited for us to feed them on Shabbat. They're not, and lo mutalot alecha. They're not yours. They're not your responsibility. And because they're not your responsibility to feed them, feeding them would involve tirha yetera. It's too much of a bother. You might say, what's the big deal? Still, the rabbi said that under tirha, we don't want a Jew to bother himself with things that have nothing to do with Shabbat, extra bother, and this would be an extra bother. It's an extra responsibility. You don't need it. You have enough things to worry about. If it's your pet, that's different. If it belongs to you, then it is your responsibility. Your goldfish, or birds, you can't touch the animals, they're muktzeh. You can feed them. You need to feed them. But not those that are not under your domain, your responsibility. The same applies to another halakha which you may not come across unless you live in a kibbutz or moshav. That is to deliver an animal, baby, to get involved in the delivery process. That's dirhai as well. That's an extra bother. You don't have to do that. If you have somebody else do that, you're supposed to do it. Why are you going to talk about it? You're touching the leash, not the dog. Well, you're not moving the dog around. Remember, when we talked about muktzeh, the main issue of muktzeh is moving the muktzeh, not touching the muktzeh. You can touch a car. The only muktzeh you cannot touch is a muktzeh that if you touch it, you may come to move it. Okay? But otherwise, to touch something, there's no issue. The real issue of muktzeh is handling it, moving it. You just put it on, nothing more. Okay, so these were examples of dirhaya tira, of too much bother. But sometimes you have a little bit of a bother, not a big bother. It's called tirham mu'etet. A little bit of a bother. A little bit of a bother is permissible if it is sort of Shabbat, it's sort of mitzvah, as before. Or let's say you leave all those chairs outside, your furniture set outside, it's going to rain, it's going to be a big rainstorm. You leave them outside, they're going to get ruined. You're allowed to take out the tarp, is it called? That big plastic cover, even though it's going to take you a little bit of a bother to cover it up. That's a little bit of a bother. That little bother is going to help you prevent a tremendous loss. It's permissible. Or if it's sort of mitzvah, or for the need of Shabbat. A small bother is okay if there's a real need for Shabbat or mitzvah, yes. Remember the famous rule, whatever you can't do, you can't ask a goy to do. Unless it is an activity which is compatible with Shabbat. The maid, she cleans the house, she washes the dishes, even though she turns on the hot water, it's okay. But she cannot do any major melacha, even though she's doing it, but she cannot do it. So anything which is a major melacha, even if it's a melacha de rabbanan, even if it's by rabbinic decree prohibited, it would be asur unless there's a need which allows us to use the goy for that. For example, somebody's sick, use the goy for that. If there's no real need, immediate need for Shabbat, then we can't ask the goy to do it. Right. Yeah, even if he does it on his own, right? If the goy turns on the light for you, you can't sit in that room. Asur le'enot, you cannot benefit from work that was done for you on Shabbat. But there are exceptions, right? Let's say he lit it for his own needs, he said last week, I believe, right? Or 2 weeks ago, right? Or let's say there was already some light, and he lit some more light. Or if it was a Torah Rabbin and Torah Mitzvah for Bet HaKnesset, he turned on the air conditioner for the shul, for the 200 people who came to pray, and it's 110 degrees outside. Torah Mitzvah and Torah Rabbin. But for your personal needs, we're much more limited. It would only be something that's midrabanan, right? If you wanted to bring something from the neighbor, in the condominium building, there's no roof, you would be able to ask the goy. So there are times you can use the goy, but not always. It's not a free ticket, here. Use a Shabbos goy, as we used to say in the U.S. Yes, there was something called goy shel Shabbat, the Shabbos goy, but only for those things that were permissible to use the goy shel Shabbat, for sick people, or if there was a great need, the sort of rabbim, mitzvah, the sort of rabbim, right? To carry a child in a karmelit, not in a reshut rabbim. There are situations we can use the goy. Imagine the flame on top of the stove extinguished, and your food is going to cool off. You can't ask the goy to turn on the oven or the stove, right? You can't ask him to do a melacha d'oraita for your need. There's no sick person involved there. However, you can ask him to carry it to the neighbor. If his neighbor has a cover on the fire, and the pot is still hot, that, if you have no other food, no, because you can't even, even if you don't ask, even if you did it on his own, you can't benefit from it, if he did it for you. So what good will it be if I hint to him? The only time we said the hinting was okay is in an indirect benefit. The child can't fall asleep, there's too much light here. And he understood that he should turn the lights off. That's okay because it's an indirect benefit. I didn't get anything from him. He took away something from me. He took away the noise from the alarm clock. He shut it off. He took away the light. I didn't receive. That's an indirect benefit I'm allowed to hint. No, but then I'm getting a direct benefit from him. If he turns on the light, if he turns on the fire, I get something from him. When he extinguishes, I didn't get anything from him. He took something away from me. There's a big difference. It's an indirect benefit. I didn't want it there, so he took it away. I didn't get something. I'm not allowed to get any benefit from a goy on Shabbat. But if it's not a reshut rabbin, right? It's only the karmelit, it's the rabbanan. and this is your only food, right? There are ways to deal with it. Remember with the refrigerator, you forgot the light bulb inside. So I told you a nice creative way on how to handle the refrigerator bulb. But if you have a goy, you would be able to use them too if you need the food in the refrigerator. Right. What was cold? What's cold? Oh, okay, very good question. The house was cold. Who lit the stove? The goy. Why? Because Halakha says when it comes to cold, everybody's considered it sick. And for that purpose, to warm the home, not to turn on the air conditioner, to warm the home because everybody is considered sick when it comes to cold weather. And you're allowed to ask the goy to turn on the heat. That's an exemption. Air conditioning, you don't have the exemption of being sick. Obviously, then yes. If it would be that situation. But if you just wanted to be a little bit more comfortable, yes, that's different. Yes, if somebody, let's say, we've heard cases, senior citizens, yes, in that case, yes. And on the fan, yes, of course. The same reason, they would be considered a cholek. But I'm just talking about general comfort. And so unless it's the Soref Rabin, the Soref Mitzrayim would be totally uncomfortable, that would be okay. Okay, so we spoke about tirha. Tirha yetirat tirha mo'etet. It's something to keep in mind. People forget about it. Even though it may be permissible, it's not a melacha. But because it's overworking ourselves, it's a on Shabbat. Okay, then there is hachana that you mentioned. Hachana means, even though what I'm about to do is completely permissible now, so what I'm about to do after Shabbat is completely permissible, I would really be able to do it now too, in a sense. However, if I'm doing it now in preparation for after Shabbat, it's a surah. In other words, I cannot do something now to save myself time for after Shabbat. The typical classical example is washing dishes after you finish your meal during the day. Friday night you can wash your dishes. Why? Because you need it for Saturday morning. But Saturday morning after you finish your meal, what are you going to wash the dishes for? So you can have clean dishes Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, so you can go out to pizza and not have to wash the dishes? No, that you cannot do. That's called hachana. You cannot prepare on Shabbat l'tzorech hachol for the sake or for the purpose of saving you time in Chol, in Motzei Shabbat. So even though what you're doing is not something asur, has nothing to do with any melachot, but you're doing it now for what? For later. So that's what you're really doing when you're washing the dishes. You're basically saving yourself the effort or the time of not having to do it later. That would be asur. Same thing with making the bed. Unless you're a very tidy, neat person, if you want your room's always clean, on Shabbat, you can't make the beds unless you're going to go back to sleep. What? Yeah. 1 second. You can put the dishes in the sink. All right. Now there's a question about when you're putting it in the sink, are you allowed to put the dishes into water so that the dirt should not solidify, and after Motzei Shabbat it will be very hard to remove? There's a question. It's discussed amongst the rabbis. Are you allowed to put it now in water? Because by immersing it in water, some of the dirt will be softer. It will not be as thick. So some say it's called preparing, because you're making it easier for yourself. You're preparing it. But a lot of rabbis say it's fully okay. The reason why it's okay is because you're not preparing. You simply don't want it to harden. It has nothing to do with making your life easier later. It's just you don't want to have this extra work if you leave it this way. To do what? No, we don't soak it because my wife doesn't mind working a little hard. It's not, you're not supposed to rearrange everything in the dishwasher. The dishwasher is a little different because you start arranging. No, you put it. Because yes. If you like a neat room, and always make the bed, it makes you feel good, it's permissible. But if you're just preparing it now, right, because you don't want to do it later, then it would be a sur. Same thing with talit. A better example is talit. That's better than a better example than the clay mitad, than the bed. Talit, after you finish wearing your talit, you can't, asur lekafel oto. You cannot fold it exactly the way, even if it's not exactly the way you always do it. Motzei Shabbat, the first thing you do when you come home, you take your talit and you fold it properly. So from the talit itself, you can understand the idea behind hachana. You cannot do something now in preparation for later, for Motzei Shabbat.
I stay there to finish. I'll pick you up at 8 o'clock and we'll go visit the cellar. I'll do a ritual before 4 weeks. And I make plans for him to pick him up at 8 o'clock, get the shop and go to the hospital. Is that allowed to talk about
what? Sorry.
We want to do a bit before folding.
Right.
My fellow listeners have left 7 emotions in the hospital. Let's go visit them after Shabbat. I'll put you on 8 o'clock and we'll go visit them at the hospital.
Yeah.
Do the mitzvah.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to plan on that on Shabbat?
That's okay. It's permissible in general terms to talk about something that you might want to do later. That's okay. Yeah. I'd like to meet with you. That's okay. You're not making any major plans that are asur on Shabbat. Because there's several ideas here. There was the idea of talking about things you can't talk about on Shabbat. This does not fall into that category. If you want to visit somebody sick. There's the issue of planning things. This is not really planning because all you're doing is expressing a desire. Right? So that expression of interest or desire in something, I'd like to see you, I'd like to meet with you, that's not asur. That's what the question was, right? Yeah, more or less, yeah. Yeah. But once you start getting into details, for example, don't worry, I'll take care of your car, or I'll fix your plumbing, or, that has nothing to do with Shabbat. It's already, the dibur itself, the speech itself, is not proper. But to express a desire and interest in something is fine. It's acceptable. Alright, even though we said that it's not permissible to prepare something on Shabbat for after Shabbat, if it's the regular preparation, like when you put something back in the refrigerator, even though you want it to cool and to maintain its freshness, these are things that we regularly do. You take something out, you finish eating it, you put it back. So even though putting back may be somehow preparing it, or freezing it, or cooling it for later, that's okay. Because this is the mode, the regular way we do things, that's okay. What is that? Yeah, you can move things around, that's okay. Alright. Another idea, which is important to keep in mind on Shabbat, is that because Shabbat is a day of rest, it's supposed to be a happy day, a day of oneg, of pleasure, a day of simcha in a sense, even though simcha is really only written by Yom Tov, not on Shabbat. It's not, the word simcha is not found. Nevertheless, it's supposed to be a happy day. So as a result of that, the rabbis say you cannot do anything that will bring about pain and mourning. You cannot tell sad stories. You cannot break bad news to people. That will put them into a bad, depressing mood. That is why we stay away, at all possible, from Nihum Avelim on Shabbat, from comforting the dead, not the dead, the mourners, those relatives, right, who are mourning for somebody who has died, because that brings about Sa'ar on Shabbat. People who have heard bad news, there's been stories of tzaddikim who have heard bad news, and they had to control themselves. And as soon as they made up the land, they broke down in tears. But they had to control themselves as much as possible, not to think about it. The Shabbat Menucha, Shabbat is so special, so beautiful. Putting Sa'ar, sadness, into it will take away the whole Shabbat. Right, sure. It's very difficult. Right, it's very extremely difficult. Yeah. Again, it's not asur to think about it, but one has to be careful not to shed tears, unless shedding the tears is an outlet for you. It will release the frustration, the emotions, then it would be permissible for you to do that too. But the Chachamim told us to be careful with stories or with conversations that lead to tzar and hevel, because it will take away from the Shabbat.
People are always talking to people who about the Matzah. It's on their mind. They want to express their emotions. Really, Kevin Yosef is desecrated. They want to talk about that. This just happened yesterday or whatever.
No, we don't talk about it on Shabbat. No, here we rarely talk about it. Sometimes somebody will say, "Did you hear?" The other one says, "Yes, I heard." But that's it. We don't get into heated conversations because it takes away from the Shabbat. People know already. There's certain things you don't talk about. Unless people are not knowledgeable, you have to tell them you don't talk about these things on Shabbat because it takes away from your Shabbat. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly the point here. Yeah. No, if you want to steer them up, to awaken them, that's something else. Yeah. No, it all depends what his goal is. If he's collecting, if he's the sort of mitzvah, he's trying to accomplish something, it might be permissible. But let me add another point, and you will understand how significant this is. We don't even say Tehillim on Shabbat for somebody who's sick, or someone who's sick, because we don't want to, bring this up on Shabbat unless he's very, very seriously sick. Then it's okay to say Tehillim. No, we're talking about for the sick. You don't say Tehillim for the sick. Now, you're allowed to go visit the sick, and even when you visit the sick, what do you say to him? You say, Shabbat himiliz'of urfuah krova lavo. Shabbat is not a time to cry, and the refuah is coming very soon. That's what you say. when you see somebody sick, or when you make a misha berah for the cholim, that's what you add towards them. Because you don't really ask for the cholim, you don't really say tilim, you don't discuss it. Unless somebody is very seriously, that's something like Shabbat, he, miliz'ot. I'll write it for you later. Ufuat krova lavo. Sidurim, yeah. So that's the idea here of pain, sadness, distressing stories. You don't break the news to somebody on Shabbat that something happened to him, his relative. You wait till after Shabbat. What good will it do? You can't sit now. There's no evidence now. What good will it do? You're just going to destroy his Shabbat. For what? You're not going to gain anything. So, yeah. Now, for this reason, the rabbis also said, you don't go on a cruise 3 days or less before Shabbat. You go Monday, you go Sunday, because during the first few days, you're still getting used to the boat, the sea, and you might vomit, and you might be dizzy. Your Shabbat will not be your Shabbat. So if you have to take the cruise for some reason, get on earlier. Another important point, that's very significant on Shabbat, is you're not allowed to fast on Shabbat. Whoever fasted on Shabbat needs to fast because he fasted on Shabbat. Let's say you had to fast because let's say you had a terrible dream. Okay, fine. But you fasted because you fasted, you have to fast. The point is that Shabbat, you have to be careful with giving it the proper kavod, and that is why we're careful in the morning not to schlep, as we say in Yiddish, the shachrit, too long, so that comes 12 o'clock, you haven't eaten or you didn't drink anything from the morning. You can't fast even for 1 hour on Shabbat. If you say, I'm going to fast for an hour on Shabbat, you can't. Alright, that's okay, as long as you're not saying, I'm fasting for an hour. You don't fast on Shabbat. Shabbat is not for fasting. Right. People is the only exception. Right? We barely have any fasts on Friday also, so you should not even enter Shabbat from after having fasted a whole day. Right? So, drink something in the morning if it's going to be a long davening. But when I say drink, I don't mean cocoa and have a piece of cake, and some people, overdo it. You can have a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. Yeah, that's okay. I do that. That lasts no problem. So even till 1:30, 2 o'clock. Perfect. As long as I had something, it keeps me going.
What about after the last day? Taking up a ship on Thursday, right? It must be a heck of a...
No, obviously, there's all depending on the circumstances. I'm talking about if you have a choice, a pleasure trip. Yeah, if it's sort of mitzvah, you're a mohel, you get home whenever you go, whenever you need to. Okay, another category that is included in the words of the prophets or the decrees of the Chachamim is something called Uvdim V'chol. Uvdim V'chol, you sometimes might see something that is assumed to do on Shabbat because it's Uvda V'chol. Uvda V'chol is translated into its Aramaic. Ma'aseh Chol. This is something done during the week, not something done on Shabbat. In other words, this activity resembles something that you do every single day, Monday through Friday. And because it resembles some very familiar activity of the Chol, we don't do it on Shabbat. A typical example of this is a grater. When we talked about tochen, that you're not allowed to grind, we said that grinding does not include those things that do not grow. For example, meat, eggs, cheese. Grinding does not really apply to it, midoraita. But you cannot use a grater for these items either, because by using the grater, you are doing a similar thing that you would do during the week in grinding. This ma'aseh, this pe'ulah, this action of using a grater for these items, it resembles what you do or how you do it, the method that you do it during the week. And because of that, we don't use the grater. You can do it tonight, you can do something else, you cut it in pieces, but now with the grater, not with the keli, not with the tool, or through the same method that you use during the week. It's called uvda v'chol. This resembles too much what you would do regularly on a daily basis. Chopping wood. Chopping wood is not really yisur in the Shabbat. There's no melacha. What do you do when you chop a log? You break it in half. There was no melacha. It was not done. There's nothing. You didn't grind it into small pieces. You didn't chop it exactly according to a certain measure, which would be the melacha of mechatech, like toilet paper, exactly by the preparation. So there's no melacha in chopping wood. But you're not going to do it because it's uvda dechol. This is what you do during the week. You chop wood for your fireplace or for whatever you need. You don't do these things on Shabbat. Besides the other problem of muktzeh here, right? The logs, unless they were designated for the use of Shabbat, it's muktzeh mahmad gufo. Any stone or stick is muktzeh mahmad gufo. It in itself has no use of Shabbat unless you designate it before Shabbat. I'm going to use this to hold my door open. Then it's fine. You can move the stone on Shabbat. So So logs and wood are going to be mukseh unless you designate it. But here, you don't want to start chopping them on Shabbat because it's uvda dechol. This is an activity that you do during the week, not on Shabbat. The same thing with ituf perot. When we talked about the melacha of me'amer, me'amer means to gather. You have the wheat has been chopped, has been harvested, has been cut, and now you gather them and pile them up. That's called me'amer. That's one of the melachot. You cannot pile them up in preparation of bringing them in to the granary, whatever. So with Rabbanan, if you had a whole bunch of fruit, a whole 25-pound box of oranges that's spilled all over your yard, right? You don't go gather all of them into the box. That's uvda dechol. This is what you would do during the week. It's a similar type of activity that you do during the week that you would not do on Shabbat. No, obviously with his loss you can use a goy. Yeah, with certain, I didn't really get into a discussion with it, but since you brought it up, we might as well talk about it. There's no prohibition of playing certain games on Shabbat, except for bitul Torah. Bitul Torah means that during that time that you're playing chess, you could be learning Torah, Chumash, Parashat HaShavua. So that's one of the issues when we talk about playing. Playing itself is not really a sur. There are certain games, of course, that may have a problem with the mukseh, depending what it does, its noises. But little children under the age of bar mitzvah who want to play outside in the yard, there's no isur. For little children, we discourage older children from playing it because there are several problems that are associated with playing ball or with other games too, like ping pong and the like. There might be other problems. So a young little boy wants to play outside with his little balls, fine. But no bicycles. Yeah, we spoke about it several weeks ago. No, I'll just repeat it. Motion detectors and all these lights that go on, you have to be careful to avoid them. If there's no way to avoid them whatsoever, it's permissible for you to go through as long as you don't benefit from the light. Yeah, as long as you're not benefiting, as long as you don't benefit from the light. If it's yours, you have to disconnect it before Shabbat. If it's going to go on when you go in or out. If it's only going to go on in the backyard that somebody's not supposed to be there, you don't have to disconnect it. But if it's in the front of your house where you're going to come from shul, you have to disconnect it since it's yours. You have control over it. If you don't have control over it, then all you have to do is avoid it. You avoid it. You have to try to avoid it. If there's no way for you to avoid it, that's the only way for you to get to where you need to. You're allowed to go as long as you don't benefit from the light. Oh, good. There's some light. Let me use that light. That you can't do. All right, molid. Molid is another form of Yisur D'Rabbanan. Included in molid means to create something, to bring something about that does not exist on Shabbat. The rabbi said that you cannot, asul rasek, you cannot crush ice or snow to make a liquid. If you have ice that you put in your cup and by itself it melts, there's something else that you cannot crush or break the ice or snow to make that. Called molid. Molidim po davar chadash, you're creating something new. Putting perfume on a garment is a form of molid because you're introducing this into the clothes. That's a surah of Shabbat. The same thing would be with melting a shumat, melting fat. Taking fat, which is congealed, and melting it and making something more of a liquid. That's all called molid. Okay, these were all examples of things that the rabbis prohibited because they take away from the Shabbat. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about things that have to do with Erev Shabbat that we need to remember. They may not necessarily be melachot, but there are things that we need to keep in mind because they are related to Shabbat. Yeah. Right. That's right. Oh no, you can't. You have to make sure that it does not go on Shabbat. Because even though we discussed timers, the halacha is that a timer is permissible only with lights or with air conditioning, perhaps. Not with sprinkler system. You should not leave it. If at all possible, you need to disconnect it. Yeah, anything that is an appliance, a major appliance that's going to go on with a timer, it's almost like a goy. Like telling a goy to do it for you. So the only heter that the rabbis allow today to use timers is the lights, the air conditioning. So there's any melacha that you began before Shabbat can continue on Shabbat. The best example is cooking. You turn on the fire and it continues to cook on Shabbat. You're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, but because you started it before Shabbat, you put clothes into a dye, sovea, that it should dye, right? You started before Shabbat, continue. Washer and dryers, some say you have to be careful, if possible, to finish before Shabbat because they make noise, which I'm going to talk about next. But otherwise, in principle, there's no problem. If you started the process before Shabbat, and it continues by itself on Shabbat, the sprinkler continues on by itself, it started before, that's okay, because it started before. You put the trap, and an animal fell in the trap on Shabbat, that's okay, you set it before Shabbat, you didn't trap it on Shabbat. However, with Bishul, you have to be careful. With the food, either you cover the flame, or it has to be fully cooked or completely raw. When we spoke about Bishul, the rabbis were concerned that you may come to move the coals, you may come to increase the flame, lower the flame, and that will be a transgression of nav'ir, of cooking, of lighting the flame. So when it comes to food, of course, when it comes to cooking, even though you're starting it before, you cover the flame, or you make sure it's fully cooked. There were other reasons to cover the flame too, in case you want to put back something back that was on the fire, you took it off and you want to put it back. Various reasons why you want to cover the flame. But the idea here is anything that began before Shabbat can continue on Shabbat. Can I send a fax to Israel if it's already Shabbat in Israel, and here it's not Shabbat? No problem. Why? No problem. If for you it's not Shabbat, even though it's Shabbat in Israel, Shabbat goes according to where you are. Since for me it's not Shabbat yet, even though it's Shabbat in Israel, you're allowed to send a fax to Israel. If it's Motzei Shabbat in New York, they're allowed to call you and leave a message on your answering machine. Because for them in New York, it's no longer Shabbat. No. It's there. The Shabbat goes by where you are. Chametz might be different. Chametz, if you own Chametz in Eretz Israel, even though you're in Los Angeles, you better sell it before it becomes Pesach there. That's already slightly different, according to some rabbis. No. The fax just prints out and it sits there. Yeah, depending what it is. Yeah. All right. However, you should not link to a radio station in Israel that's operating on Shabbat. That's different because there you're like benefiting from work that's being done in Shabbat. That should not be. So that's different. However, listening to radio itself on Shabbat is asur. I shouldn't say it's asur. It should not be done because it shows a total lack of kavod for Shabbat. It's called Zeluta de Shabbat. It's another category. Zeluta de Shabbat means the disrespect of Shabbat. If you have heavy machinery that's making a lot of noise, even though you started it before Shabbat, everybody hears it. It's Zeluta de Shabbat. It's a lack of kavod, a lack of respect for Shabbat. The same thing with radios. Even though you had the radio on a timer, even though you left it on before Shabbat, the only time you do it is during the Scud missile attack, during the dangerous time, emergencies. The rabbis say it's permissible, of course, to leave your radio on. You should leave your radio on. You have to hear these things. Otherwise, don't leave your radio on or your TV on for Shabbat. You cannot do work too close to Shabbat. If it's very close to Shabbat, you're going to do a major job now, you might forget yourself. That's another thing to keep in mind. You leave your store, you leave 2 hours in advance. You don't wait for the last minute. You don't do something, unless you're working for somebody, and everything else is being taken care of, so you're at home, but your wife is cooking, then of course you can come a little later. Otherwise, you need time to prepare.
Let's say you're in New York, Friday afternoon, Friday night, you call you, it's not yet your mind yet. You pick up the phone and you start talking to them. You realize you're talking to a fellow Jew who already into Shabbat.
You have to hang up.
You have to hang up immediately?
Yeah, you have to tell them, I'm sorry, I can't allow you to do the Shabbat. Of course. Yeah, you got to tell him, you explain to him. You're not doing any Yisur, but you're helping him. Sure, you continue. Sure. Alright, before Shabbat arrives, everybody should check to see if everything was done. The fire was covered, the light bulb was taken out of the refrigerator, the candles were lit. Right before Shabbat arrives, the husband or whoever is in charge should make sure that all these items have been taken care of. There is a special area called Ben HaShemashot, and that is the time, the twilight between the sunset and Set HaKochavim, when the stars come out. It's a safek, whether that's already called night or day. We don't do any melacha during that time. If a woman forgot to light candles, she's allowed to ask a goy. That time frame, twilight, would be permissible to ask a goy to do something letzorech Shabbat, letzorech mitzvah. She forgot to light the candle, she should not take a chance and light at that time. If it's after the Shekiah sunset, too bad, too late. And guess what? If you missed one Shabbat, from that Shabbat on, you will have to add an additional candle. So you have to be careful not to forget to light your candles on time. Talking about lighting candles, who's the one that's in charge of lighting candles? Preferably the mitzvah is for the woman. How many? The minhag is at least 2. Even though if you only have 1, you should light the 1. But the minhag is achor v'shamor, you light 2. Some have the custom to light according to how many members in the family. If you're a guest, you don't need to light 5 or 7. If you're a guest, you light the 2. The question about lighting candles, however, is what do you do if you're going to be invited somewhere? Where should you light? At that home or in your home? You're walking over later to eat there. Because the idea of lighting candles is that there should be shalom bayit, there should be light in the house, there should be kavod for the Shabbat, there should be onik for Shabbat. So where should you light? So if you're going to be in your home for a while and you're going to enjoy your candles, then light at home. If you're immediately going to go there, light where you're going to eat. Unless you're going to come back and those long candles are still going to be lit, then leave them lit in your home. But if you suspect by the time you come home there's not going to be no more candles, and you're leaving right away, right, then light them over there. Otherwise, it's always better to light where you're going to eat, in the same room where you're going to eat.
Get home early and not try to keep close.
Right?
You have to do all the preparation.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah,
So is it something that we adopted? Make sure you're home at least a half hour or an hour with candlelighting.
Yeah,
sure. Rush it one
Candlelighting, by the way, the custom for most communities is 18 minutes before sunset. Right? Yeah, approximately. Right. Now, the husband can do a little bit more work. He can take a shower, things, but he should be careful of not doing everything to the last minute, because there is another idea called Tosefet Shabbat. Tosefet Shabbat means that you add a couple minutes before Shabbat arrives. At the beginning of Shabbat and at the end of Shabbat. You don't begin at the exact second. First of all, we can't calculate the exact minute. Second of all, we want to add a little bit more holiness. You take a little bit of Friday and add it to the Shabbat, same thing with Moshe Shabbat. You don't rush out right away. You add another minute or two to Tosefet Shabbat. Tosefet Shabbat is a very important thing. So you don't wait to begin Shabbat at the last minute. You bring the Shabbat a little earlier. The last time that we're going to discuss is Maaseh Shabbat Asur. Anything that was done on Shabbat, especially intentionally, that is asur to do, you can have benefit from it. There's a question of what, of course, happens to it after Shabbat. There's a machloket. The custom is that on Shabbat you can have benefit, and after Shabbat, if you did it intentionally, you can't benefit from it forever. If you cook something on Shabbat and you knew it was asur, you can't benefit from it. Other people can enjoy it after Shabbat, not on Shabbat. Nobody can enjoy it and benefit from it on Shabbat. Whereas with a goy, if you ask the goy to do something that you're not allowed to ask him to do, then the halakha is that you have to wait after Shabbat as long as it would take for him to do it again. If he did something that takes 45 minutes, you cannot benefit from what the goy did for you until 45 minutes after Shabbat. So you shouldn't get into the habit of taking advantage of a goy. Since you used him, now you gotta wait. You cannot benefit from it. So Maaseh Shabbat Asur, anything that was done by Isur, you cannot benefit from it. You cannot enjoy it. There are situations, of course, where it's allowed, depending on the circumstances. If it was, for example, the shogeg, if it was done accidentally, the shogeg, if it was not done intentionally, you know that it might be permissible, for you as well after Shabbat. So depending on the circumstances, but you have to keep in mind that something that is asur to do, if it was done, you may not be able to benefit from it. There's a question: what happens if somebody carried a key and opened the shul? So he did a avirah. Can you enter the shul? Well, the point over there is obviously you're not benefiting from the key itself that was carried. What the key did, so it's a little bit different. But somebody brought you something, that may be different on Shabbat. No, you can't give a gift on Shabbat either. You should bring it before Shabbat, not on Shabbat. Yeah. Okay, I think we've covered everything. As far as lighting candles, one second. As far as lighting candles, there is a custom to light oil. Sephardic use the oil. Ashkenazim use wax. Oil is better, but you can use either of the two, whichever you want. Yeah.
What is the reason for the narrow that you're having?
That has to do with transactions, right? That you mentioned in the past. There are certain things that are under the category of mekach u'mimkar, masao matan, business, or similar to business activity, like calculating, measuring,